Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Moose Trail. I'm your host, Chris the Moose Johnson, and today we got a very packed episode for you. That's right. We have Will Luna in the Hot Hierarchy breaking down your college football rankings and the college football playoffs, getting a little interesting. UNLV top 23 and top 24. Let's see what Will's going to say about that. On top of that, we have Kyle Sparrow and his sensational fantasy breakdown. No Jake Gruel today in his Heisman watch because he's out doing some really hard work for the Golden Knights. But besides that, we're going to be getting into the NFL breakdown with me and yours truly, of course. We're going to be having a great day today. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we'll send it right over to you, Will. Let's get it started.
Thank you, Moose, and what a week we had here on the Hot Hierarchy over week 12 of the college football season. So many games that I predicted, so many angles that I provided that ended up turning out to be the correct ones. Not only that, but the rankings work out perfectly in my favor at this point in the season, and I'm very happy with how it looks out. But I look at the college football playoff poll, and it is horrendous. There are teams upon teams upon teams that just make no sense to me when it comes to their rankings. But we're here to talk about it. We're here to fix it right here on the Hot Hierarchy. I did talk about how I thought UNLV season was over, but apparently not. Let's talk about teams ranked 11 through 25 in the rankings. As you're going to see right there at the bottom at 24 is going to be none other than UNLV. But at 11 is Tennessee. They dropped 4 spots out of the top 10. Boise State and SMU up in the rankings. We've got BYU dropping 8 spots all the way down to 14. Texas A&M stays stagnant at 15. We've got Colorado, Clemson, South Carolina, Army, and Tulane all moving up spots, making room for those non-ranked teams like Arizona State, Iowa State, Illinois, and our beloved UNLV Rebels. But in the midst of all of that, is that Missouri after they lost to South Carolina? We'll talk about it in just a second. Now let's talk about the Hot Hierarchy. At number 11, I've got Miami just outside the top 10 looking in. Army and Tulane both move up 2 spots. We've got Tennessee moving down 7 spots to 14. Then Boise State move up 2. Clemson is right there in the middle at 16. We've got South Carolina, Colorado, and Texas A&M, all moving up spots in the Hot Hierarchy. Boise State dropped 7 spots to 20. Ironically, less spots than in the playoff poll. And then we've got Arizona State, Iowa State, JMU for me instead of Illinois make their first appearance into the Hot Hierarchy. And then Louisiana drop all the way to 24. I've still got some value on them. I'll go into it in just a little second. And UNLV right there at 25 with a win over San Diego State. Let's talk about that San Diego State score. 41-20. The Rebels really coming out hot against the Aztecs, shutting down the freshman quarterback of the San Diego State Aztecs, who's really been such a godsend for them this season. But they're able to get a job done at Allegiant Stadium. Meanwhile, Boise State do get the job done on the road against San Jose State. I did say it would be a very risky matchup for the Broncos, and it was in the first half. Then the San Jose State Spartans just beat themselves up in the second half and allowed the Broncos to get away with the win. Now Tennessee, a brutal loss to Georgia. Georgia basically owning the game the entire time against the Volunteers. They get that win 31-17. It drops Tennessee 4 spots, but for me, I have them dropping 7 spots. I think I value the loss a little more. Speaking of valuing teams a little more than I feel like the playoff poll should be, are teams like Army and Tulane. Yes, I like them a lot. I have them moving up 2 spots in the rankings, but Army on a bye week moving up 5 spots. I mean, talk about trying to make up, those blank spots that they were trying to recover in previous weeks like I thought they should have done to start off with. Yet, here they are moving up 5 spots on a bye week. Great time to be a Black Knights fan. Nonetheless, we've got Clemson with a sketchy win over Pittsburgh on the road. They do have an interesting matchup this weekend. We will talk about that in just a second. Arizona State handling business against Kansas State. That was something that me and the playoff poll definitely agreed on. Those 14 points coming in the latter half of the game for the Wildcats, really proving why Kansas State aren't really that team anymore. And speaking of teams that aren't there, LSU finally out of the rankings. I've been saying it for weeks, but it took one more loss apparently to boot them out of the rankings. But that is primarily because they're an SEC teams. And you want to talk about SEC teams, oh, here we go. Here's Missouri at the bottom, still ranked, even though they lost by 4 points to South Carolina. South Carolina move up 3 in the rankings, but Missouri, it doesn't make sense. The SEC buys in the playoff poll is just ridiculous at this point. Again, it's time we start valuing the good teams over the bad teams, not the most entertaining teams over the least entertaining teams. If you win a game, you go up in the rankings. That's how simple it should be. But as we look over to next week, there are a couple of interesting matchups, not to mention the fact that a lot of these SEC teams are now at the point where they are just playing a whole bunch of nobodies. We've got Tennessee taking on UTEP. We've got Clemson taking on the Citadel. I know they're an ACC team, but we've got South Carolina taking on Wofford. this late into the season, that is unacceptable. And the only reason why they do it is because they need these wins. I mean, South Carolina, they're already a 3-loss team. Yeah, an 8th win would be great, especially if it's being given to us for free. Oh, Tennessee plays UTEP right after we play Georgia on the road because we know we're going to lose that game. Oh, great, we go from an 8-2 team to a 9-2 team. That's better than some of the records in the top 10. Wow, we really see. No, that is unacceptable. Yet we see it happening week in and week out. Boise State essentially have a bye week. SMU at Virginia could be interesting, but I think they get the job done. BYU on the road to Arizona State Sun Devils. That is my prediction this week as well. I have the Kansas Jayhawks, and I'm going to ride with them, especially when we go down and talk about Colorado, who's going to be playing them this weekend. I think the Cougars and the Buffaloes are in deep trouble here, and this could be a great spot for Arizona State to just jump in the top contention for the Big 12 championship title. So I think Arizona State gets a job done. Colorado and BYU possibly fall short this weekend. Could be very interesting in the Big 12, certainly. Army, Notre Dame could be a very interesting matchup, but the only reason why it's interesting is because it's on the hierarchy. For me, I've got Army as the 12 seed just on the outside looking in, and if they beat a top 10 Notre Dame team, then both of these teams have reasons as to why they should be in the top 10. You're looking at Notre Dame, who arguably will get a dominant win over Army. Yeah, they should be in the top 10. You have Army, who's beat a pretty hot Notre Dame team for the time being, then they should be in the top 10. But yeah, it's going to be very hard to put a team that's 19, jump them all the way, not only to the top 10, but teams like Boise State, as they're trying to compete for that last spot in the 12-team bracket. It's going to be very hard to do that. Now we go down to Louisiana. They had a tough loss against South Alabama. JMU also had a tough win against Old Dominion. Not the greatest showings from either team there, but I do still see some value from Louisiana as they do show up in the second half against South Alabama, try to get the job done late, but are unable to. They just gave up too many points to the Jaguars early on in the game. They do play Troy at home, should be very simple, but JMU on the road to Appalachian State could cause some problems for the Dukes as they are looking to further implement themselves in the hot hierarchy rankings. Nonetheless, the playoff poll as well. And there it is at the bottom, UNLV taking on San Jose State. This is a very interesting matchup because, I mean, we need to win. We need to win out, let's be real. But UNLV, San Jose State, in the history that we've been playing one another, we have never been able to beat San Jose State and the Spartans on their home turf. So great opportunity here for UNLV to make history, but by the time this episode airs, that game would have already ended. So hopefully our hopes are still high, but that moves us over to the Fresno State, Colorado State game on Saturday. I feel like all us Rebel fans are now the biggest Bulldog fans after we romped them earlier on in the season at home here at Allegiant Stadium. But Fresno State do pose as a big threat to the Rams at home, and nonetheless, they are 4-point favorites. So go Fresno State. We're hoping you do a job for us so that we can get into the Mountain West Championship. Now, we are going to skip our On the Block segment. Instead, we're just going to hop right into the Big Ten. As you can see here, that's primarily because I feel like at this point, if you're not in the top 25, there's no reason to talk about you. If you're on the block, then I feel like there's no hope for you to actually get to the 12-team bracket, whereas I still see teams like JMU and even Arizona State and Louisiana still trying to have a shot at making it to that 12-team bracket. But we're just going to jump right into the top 10 here, talking about the college football playoff poll. And at number 1, unsurprisingly, is Oregon. They're still undefeated. Ohio State, Texas, Penn State, Indiana, none of those teams are moving, but Notre Dame, Alabama, Miami, Ole Miss, and Georgia all moving up spots in the rankings after the only good kind of win over the weekend was that Georgia-Tennessee win that they had at home, excuse me. But we're going to move over to the hot hierarchy. Going to look very different as I have Oregon and Texas at 1 and 2 staying stagnant. Notre Dame, Ohio State jump Indiana. Alabama staying stagnant. Ole Miss, Penn State, and Georgia all moving up spots. And SMU stay put. They let Georgia jump them in the rankings to number 9. Now, looking at some scores, the first one I want to talk about is Alabama and Mercer. Yes, they beat them 52-7. That's a great win for the Alabama Crimson Tide. And the reason why I had them so high in the rankings here is because I saw this game coming up and I knew that it would be a romp job, but it'd be very hard to not only put them in the top 5 spot as a 2-loss team, but to try and put them over an Indiana team who's currently undefeated at the time. And I know people keep talking about the strength of schedule. Alabama has a harder schedule, Clearly, that's why they're playing Mercer this week, this late into the season. Again, this SEC bias is getting so out of hand. We're not talking about that enough. Everyone is so obsessed with the strength of schedule when nobody cared about that 3 years ago when it was Alabama and Clemson in every single national championship. Now that it's expanded, all of a sudden we care about, oh, now it's about who we play. No, it's always been like that. But the thing is that if you are going to play Mercer, that's what you should do against them. When Indiana plays teams like Purdue and Michigan State, that's what they need to do against those teams. But they do have an opportunity this upcoming weekend. We'll talk about that in just a second. But Alabama jumping not only Miami, who I don't think should be in the top 10 at all, but Ole Miss as well, because they beat Mercer. Like, this screams the same thing that the committee did with BYU just a week ago, and we see how that turned out as they lost to Kansas. Georgia just behind Ole Miss in the playoff poll. This is exactly why I had Ole Miss at 7, because they essentially have to move together at this point. There's no reason why Georgia should be jumping Ole Miss, especially after they lost to them last week. It just doesn't make sense. I'm not sure what the playoff poll is doing anymore, but again, we see this SEC bias time in and time out. I do have Notre Dame valued much higher than the playoff poll. A great win against Virginia. Not a lot of teams have been able to do that this season, but two sketchy wins at the top from Oregon and Texas as they score less than 20 points apiece. Texas being held to 20 and Oregon being held to 16. Oregon not really finding their stride until the fourth quarter, but they do get a job done nonetheless. Now, as we look over to next week, we've got Oregon taking on a bye week. Thankfully, I will be at that Washington game with my lovely girlfriend, Missy. She got me those tickets. We're heading up to Eugene, so this will be the last of me for the next 2 weeks. I will see you then. But before I go, Ohio State's playing Indiana. That's the big game that I'm talking about. Great spot for Indiana, but they are on the road. Now, the question is will the college football playoff poll just drop them out of the top 10 if they lose this game, even by a point? I think they will, and I think that is unacceptable. But we'll have to see. Penn State playing at Minnesota. We already talked about Notre Dame playing Army. That should be a very interesting matchup. Alabama at Oklahoma could have been an interesting matchup a few weeks ago, but now not so much. Miami have a bye week in Wake Forest. Ole Miss on the road to Florida. This is a great matchup, especially since, again, Georgia's playing UMass, who is not even an SEC team. I couldn't even tell you what conference UMass played in. But Ole Miss are on the road against Florida. That's a great spot for Ole Miss to kind of separate themselves from the Bulldogs and further put themselves into the higher top 10 version of the college football playoff poll. And to kind of negate the differences here, SMU really going to be the only big difference there. They're playing Virginia on the road. As we just saw, Notre Dame handled business last week. We're hoping that SMU can do the same. Now, let's look at how the bracket is looking 13 weeks in. Here's the college football playoff poll. They've got Oregon winning the Big Ten, Texas winning the SEC, Miami winning the ACC, Boise State winning the Mountain West, and then Alabama, Notre Dame, Ole Miss, Indiana, Georgia, Penn State, BYU wins the Big 12, and they play Ohio State in the first round. Now, again, the way it works is that you have the top seed of the championship winners being, so you have, since Oregon is number 1 and they win the championship, they're 1. Now, even though Texas is 3, they'll still be the 2 seed because Ohio State is currently the 2 seed. So that's why Texas is at the 2 spot for the playoff bracket, and so on and so forth. Again, not sure why Miami is there, not sure why Boise State there. We saw the kind of damage that they can do to themselves, but you look across the board here, and a lot of these games are really just for viewership's sake. I mean, Alabama, Notre Dame, we know how that one's going to go. Ole Miss, Indiana, we know how that one's going to go. Georgia, Penn State, we know how that one's going to go. BYU, Ohio State, we know how that one's going to go. And the ironic thing is I feel like all the road teams win these games, and then they go on to the future playoff brackets, and that's when it gets interesting. Whereas if we look over to the hot hierarchy bracket, I've got Oregon, Texas, SMU, Army, and then I've got Boise State winning the Mountain West, Ole Miss, Alabama, Penn State, Indiana, Georgia, Ohio State, and then Notre Dame right there at the bottom. I feel like this bracket is much more entertaining than this ACC Big Ten, who's the better team kind of. This is a, hey, let's give the teams a shot, because that's what the 12-team bracket was made for. We're giving teams like Army a shot, SMU a shot, Boise State a shot. Not to mention that the top 4 teams are teams that weren't in these conferences just a year ago. Oregon, we're in the Pac-12. Texas, we're in the Big 12. SMU, we're in the ACC, and Army, we're in the AAC. These are brand new to their conferences, yet they are dominating so much so that they are currently leading in the brackets. But you look at Ole Miss, Alabama, that's a great matchup between 2 great SEC teams. And who do they play? The best Big Ten team. Then you've got the 3rd and 4th best Big Ten teams. Who do they play if one of those wins? They play the best SEC team. Then you've got the 2nd best SEC team and the 2nd best Big Ten team. Who do they play? The best ACC team. And then you've got a Mountain West team and an independent team who's not even in a conference and it's just playing teams to play teams. They play one another and play the winner of the ACC. This is what the bracket should be looking like year in and year out. but yet the playoff bracket manages to find a way to make it look like this so that it's just SEC and Big Ten heavy, whereas this kind of gives you a good dive at so many different options and so many different teams. But that is going to do it for me this week, and not only this week, but next week as well. I hope you guys enjoy your Thanksgiving break. I will see you in December towards Christmas time. It's going to be ramping up, exciting times here on the Hot Hierarchy.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. I'm Kyle Sparrow, and welcome to another week of Sparrow's Sensational Fantasy Breakdown. And what a week of football. We saw a couple upsets and a couple really good games, so let's hop straight into it. First up, we got Bo Nix with the Denver Broncos, became the number 7 ranked quarterback after week 11 in fantasy. 28.78 points against Atlanta, 307 yards, passing with 4 touchdowns. There's where you get your fantasy points, ladies and gentlemen. Projected 17.7 points week 12 against the Raiders. And this Broncos offense is starting to click. They're 6-5 and on a hot streak right now. I have him as a starter due to Bo Nix. Bo Nix is only a rookie, guys. Can't forget about that. And he is playing like he's a seasoned pro in this league. Moving on, a guy that many doubted in 2 weeks ago, Anthony Richardson of the Indianapolis Colts became number 27 ranked quarterback after week 11. 28.08 points against the New York Jets in week 11. 272 yards passing, 1 touchdown. But here's where you get your fantasy points. 2 rushing touchdowns on 10 attempts and 32 yards. And he's projected just under 15 points week 12 against Detroit. And he is bouncing back as he got this Colts offense a very much needed win. Kind of proved the doubters wrong. But they are going against a Detroit Lions team that is arguably the best team in football currently. I do have him as a sit-em due to how the Detroit Lions are playing right now. Speaking of the Detroit Lions, we got Jared Goff, who is arguably a top 5 quarterback. He is a top 5 quarterback in this league. He is in the top 10 of fantasy ranked quarterbacks after week 11. Almost 35 points against the Jacksonville Jaguars, 412 yards, 4 touchdowns. He didn't only rush for 4 attempts and 21 yards, but he is more of a passing quarterback. Projected 15.7 points against Indianapolis. And as I said before, the Detroit Lions are the best NFL team currently. I don't think anyone touches them, and I do have him as a starter because the next player we talk about plays into Jared Goff's hand. And it is Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is probably one of the best wide receivers in football. I'd say he's top 3 currently. Number 2 ranked wide receiver after week 11, 38.7 points against Jacksonville, 11 receptions, 161 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Projected 17.5 points against Indianapolis next week. And he is arguably the best receiver in the league. As I said before, the Detroit Lions offense always seems to be clicking on the run, pass, even Jared Goff scrambling out of the pocket. Arguably, if you don't start him, I can't see you winning any other matchups. And another receiver that kind of showed out this week, coming back from injury, Cooper Kupp became the number 22nd ranked wide receiver after week 11, 28.6 points against New England, 6 receptions, 106 yards, and 2 touchdowns, projected 15.2 points against Philadelphia, and he's back to form. He was out a long time with an injury, and the Rams are really down and out, but due to the next player we talk about and Cooper Kupp, they're kind of back in this thing. Matthew Stafford's kind of playing really well too, but yeah, I for sure have Cooper Kupp as a starter as he is the clear wide receiver 1 in LA. And Jackson Smith-Njigba for the Seattle Seahawks is our next receiver, number 10 ranked receiver, after week 11. 21.8 points against San Francisco, 10 receptions, 110 yards, projected just over 13 points week 12 against Arizona. And he's the favorite target for Geno Smith, but I do have him as a sit-in because DK Metcalf is on the rise. He's coming back from injury, so see Jackson Smith-Njigba not get as many targets. And I talked about him when I talked about Cooper Kupp. It's going to be Puka Nacua, the wide receiver 2 in LA, number 66 ranked wide receiver after week 11. And he's coming back from injury as well a couple weeks ago. And he's starting to he's finding his rhythm. 25.3 points against New England, 7 receptions, 123 yards, and a touchdown. Projected 15.6 points against Philadelphia. And he's back. He had a knee injury, and he had a bit of a oopsie against Seattle with that ejection that he got. But I think he's back. I think Cooper Kupp, Matthew Stafford, and Puka Nacua are firing on all cylinders. And watch out. Moving on to tight ends. And, I mean, this guy had probably the best day of all of these guys. Taysom Hill, number 12 ranked tight end after week 11. And he kind of is both He's a sort of versatile player. He can run, he can pass, and he can catch the ball. We saw him on Sunday. We saw him on Sunday run the ball. That's why he's got 3 touchdowns, 7 attempts, and 138 yards rushing. But he also had 8 receptions and 50 yards against Cleveland. He does have a bye week next week, but be on the rise as the Saints are not that good of a team. Yes, they did get a win against Cleveland, but Taysom Hill looked very, very good. So I have him as a stardom week 13 against the LA Rams. And this guy, no doubt, rookie tight end, Brock Bowers, number 1 ranked tight end after week 11, 31.3 points week 11 against Miami, 13 receptions, 126 yards, and 1 touchdown. Projected just over 13.5 points week 12 against Denver. And he's a top tight end in the league. I don't think there's any doubt in that. Obviously, I have him as a stardom. Moving on to running backs, we do have Breece Hall, who is arguably one of the best running backs in the league right now. Number 5 ranked running back after week 11, just over 31 points, week 11 against Indianapolis, 16 attempts, 78 yards, a touchdown. But as I said in weeks past, he is also a receiving back, 7 receptions, 43 yards, and a touchdown. And the Jets do have a bye week next week, but he's the best player on the New York Jets right now. I know that's a controversial take with Davante Adams and Aaron Rodgers on the field, but the Jets completely doing an overhaul, and it's not really working out for them that much. I have him as a stardom for week 13 against Seattle. He's the best player on that Jets roster. And rounding out this segment this week, we do have Josh Jacobs of the Green Bay Packers, number 15 ranked running back after week 11, 23.4 points against Chicago in what was a heartbreaking defeat for the Chicago Bears. Blocked field goal for the win. Packers still own the Bears. He did have 18 attempts, 76 yards, and 1 touchdown on the ground. Receiving, he had 4 receptions and 58 yards. Projected 15.8 points week 12 against San Francisco. And he's a power back. He's a receiving back. He can pretty much do it all, much like Breece Hall. Not to that caliber, I don't think, but I do have him as a stardom, as Green Bay is also starting to click and starting to roll. But yeah, that's all I have for you guys on this week's segment of Sparrow's Sensational Fantasy Breakdown. As always, I'm Kyle Sparrow, and we'll see you guys next week.
Thank you so much, Kyle, for such a great breakdown of fantasy. Of course, every week I really enjoy watching all the fantasy, seeing if you're right or wrong. It's been a little rough here and there, but hey, it happens to the best of us. Not all of us can be Nostradamus, but hey, that's all good. We're going to be getting into our NFL breakdown right now. We got a lot to go over because, hey, there's a lot of changes in the standings, because let's get right into it. First, our NFL standings. We have the Detroit Lions taking over the number 1 spot in the NFL for the first time this year. The Kansas City Chiefs have been undefeated, and that has been keeping them at number 1. But with that loss this weekend, the Detroit Lions are going to finally be at number 1. But that doesn't mean everything is staying the same, because guess what? We had the Chargers in the top 10. They're at number 8. And we have the Ravens at number 9 because they lost to the Steelers like I predicted, but the Moose stat didn't, because that's just what we do here. In the back half of the NFL standings, though, we have a lot of teams switching around their spots as well, because guess what? We have the Cowboys, who were normally a really good team and staying up in the top 16, around the fringe of the bottom 16 sometimes. But guess what? They're at 25 now. There's no coming back from this. They're 3-7. The Jaguars, however, take over the number 1 pick again, because that's the Jaguars are going to be doing. The Colts had a really nice time with Anthony Richardson taking over the quarterback 1 spot and beating the Jets again. Looks like Aaron Rodgers' time in New York is over. What a crazy situation. New York and Brooklyn, kind of the same situation with the NBA. James Harden, Kyrie, and KD didn't work out. Now Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams aren't working out. So we'll see what they're going to do with that and their future. But the Raiders staying within the top 4 picks of the NFL draft. So we'll get into our recaps right now, because we got a lot to go over too. We got the Eagles winning on Thursday Night Football, really putting on a dominant win against the Commanders. The Commanders and the Eagles were a really close game in the beginning part of the game, but the Eagles ended up pulling it out because Saquon Barkley is just a monster. Around 200 yards that game. And on top of it, let's talk about the young defense on the Eagles, because we can talk about the Eagles offense every single week and talk about how Saquon Barkley is just a monster. But instead, we need to talk about how good this young defense is too, and how they're actually going to be contending with the Detroit Lions, because Quinyon Mitchell has just been going completely off against every single receiver he's faced. He held Terry McLaurin to 0 catches this weekend. That's right, he held him to 0 catches. The wide receiver 1 option on the Commanders got held to 0 catches. It's insane. Quinyon Mitchell was just blanket covering him the entire game. Cooper DeJean having an amazing year in the nickel and slot. He's outplaying Avonte Maddox better than he ever had played when he was in his prime as well. Cooper DeJean playing lights out on top of not only Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, and Nakobe Dean, the young Georgia defense that they drafted, and Nolan Smith. All of them completely developing into what we thought they might, and the Eagles looking really smart with this week and their recent draft success. So we'll see what the Philly can do if they can keep their standing in the NFC East and hold on to being the NFC East champs this year. We're not going to just skip on them because we got to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers. Same state, same situation. Pittsburgh division game goes against the number 1 ranked team, we thought, by the Moose stat, with the Ravens. And the Ravens lost by 2. They didn't even score a touchdown on the Ravens. The Bengals had scored, I believe Joe Burrow had scored around 9 passing touchdowns against the Ravens this year and hadn't won a single game against them. But the Steelers didn't even score a single touchdown, kicked only field goals, and won the game in Pittsburgh against the Ravens. Defense matters, and defense stepped up this time against Lamar Jackson and held him and Derrick Henry pretty quiet this week. But not only that, because we got the Kansas City Chiefs, and they just lost a massive game against the Buffalo Bills. That's right, the Buffalo Bills in Buffalo finally got their revenge against Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. That team is completely terrifying and has been playing lights out all year long without even having good quarterback play. So it's insane to see the Chiefs fall at 9-1 right now against the Buffalo Bills, and the Bills not even crack the number 1 spot in the playoffs. Because look, we're going to get into it right now with the playoffs. Yeah, that's right. The Kansas City Chiefs are still number 1 in the playoffs. They lost to the Buffalo Bills. The Bills played a lot better of a game. They look like a better team, and they're still number 2 in the AFC playoff picture because their record is 9-2, not like the Chiefs 9-1. Even though I think the Chiefs, we might be seeing them on their way out right now because the Chiefs just don't look like a good team when you watch them play football. I don't think they've really faced a good team until the Bills, and the Bills really put hands on them. So we'll see what's going to happen from here on out with the Chiefs. But that's not all, because we have the Steelers staying at number 3. They beat the Ravens this weekend, massive division game, and that's going to keep them number 3. The Chargers and the Broncos also are staying within the playoffs. And if you look at the NFL predictions on percentages, if they win this week, most of these teams are actually around the 50 to 70% plus range, including about 3 to 4 of these teams being in the 99% chance of making the playoffs. So really, the AFC is not up for grabs. The in the hunt teams should stop really trying and start looking for the draft, because I don't see the Broncos or the Chargers or the Steelers or the Ravens really giving up a spot at all in this playoffs, especially to the Colts, the Dolphins, or the Bengals. But let's get over to the NFC, because the NFC has a lot to go over. And yeah, the Eagles staying at 2, the Lions staying at 1. The Cardinals, though, now move up to 3. I can't describe how weird it is for me to see the Cardinals doing this well. I didn't believe in them this much this year, and they're really proving me wrong. But hey, that's what the Cardinals do this year for me. I guess just prove me consistently wrong. On top of that, we had the Falcons at 4, we had the Vikings at 5, we had the Commanders at 7, we had the Packers at 6. A lot of good teams there, and the entire NFC West is in the hunt, all tied at 5-5. They're ranked at 8, 9, and 10 in the NFC. So there's no way that we don't see them try to make a push into the playoffs, even though at the 7th seed, the Commanders are 7-4. They have to win 2 games and hope the Commanders drop 2 games, and I don't know if that's going to happen. So the NFC West is going to be up for grabs if the Cardinals can hold on to the NFC West divisional games. It's going to be a lot of divisional wins that's going to decide that division big time. But let's get on over to our top 10 pick projections, because we can't just talk about the good teams. Of course, we got to talk about the bad teams, and the bad teams are looking to change their future in this draft, even though it doesn't look to be that good of a draft class. We have the Jaguars at number 1. They're going to be looking to try to get Travis Hunter. Let's be honest, he's going to be the number 1 overall pick. Everyone knows that. Number 2, Titans. 3, Giants. Giants had the number 1 pick for 1 week, and the Giants fans rejoiced. They were so excited. and now it's gotten ripped away. They're going to number 3. The Raiders are at 4, Browns 5, Jets 6, Patriots 7, Cowboys. Top 10 pick, Ashton Johnson might be going high. A lot of Cowboy fans really want him on their team, and I can't blame him. He's an absolute monster, and he's been playing lights out this year, but we'll see. There's a lot of good running backs in this draft class, though. It's probably one of the best running back draft classes we've seen in a long time, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's what we take away from this draft class moving forward, is maybe 1 quarterback, maybe 2 quarterbacks, Travis Hunter, and then a bunch of running backs. A lot of tackles as well. There's a lot of strong tackle class, so we'll see what's going to happen there. But a lot of teams looking to change their year. Saints and Panthers are going to close out that top 10. We're going to be going into the Moose versus Machine, though, and that is my favorite segment because, we're staying in a deadlock consistently with the stats, and that's because I know ball. And we got to get into my projections because last week I had 4 losses, 5 losses, didn't too hot. But I had a lot of good wins too. We had projected the Steelers to beat the Ravens. We projected the Bills to beat the Chiefs. We projected the Broncos to beat the Falcons, even though that the Moose Stat disagreed. And we're going to get on to the Moose Stat stats because we got to see what they're going to get into too. They also missed on a few of them. The Bengals, they missed on the Ravens, they missed on the Falcons. All of us missed on the Jets. I feel like the Jets were kind of a consensus pick to win this weekend because we thought they were going to do something, turn it around. That team is horrible. I don't think I'm going to ever choose them to win a game again. And if I do, oh well. You know what I mean? It's tough. I don't think that team's going to do a lot. I think the same thing about the Raiders, though, as well. So probably won't see me take another Raiders pick this year at all either because the Dolphins just absolutely manhandled them. But let's get into my week's projections because we got a lot to go over. Yeah, we got the Steelers continuing their success. The Chiefs bounce back from their loss. The Eagles continue their win streak. The Lions are going to hurt the Colts. I'm not looking forward to that. And I got another upset on the Ravens. I had the Chargers beating them on Monday Night Football because I'm telling you, there's a certain way that the Ravens lose games, and it's 2 teams like the Steelers, like the Chargers, that have a really good run offense and a really good run defense, and they know how to play the pass and how to contain. That Chargers defense is going to be a real problem for the Ravens, and I can't wait to watch what's going to happen this weekend. The Moose Stat disagrees on me with a few things, though, this weekend, including that Ravens game. So let's get really into our disagreements right here with the Moose Stat, because I say the Giants are going to be beating the Buccaneers this weekend, and that's because they just put in Tommy DeVito, Tommy Cutlets. We'll see what he's going to do. I think the team's going to rally around him. He's a lot better of a quarterback than people give him credit for, especially in these tight situations when he comes off the bench after a few weeks of struggling from Daniel Jones. Drew Lock is the quarterback, though, and it's a little weird how they just instantly benched Drew Lock again, even though he played really well when Daniel Jones was out for quite a few drives, threw an interception or 2, but hey, they were going against the Eagles, and the Eagles were ready to smash that team because it was Saquon Barkley's comeback game. So we'll see what the Giants are going to do. The Moose Stat disagrees with me and says that the Buccaneers will win this game. I can see that happening. Look, Antoine Winfield Jr. and the back end of that Buccaneers defense is really strong. You know how not Mike Evans. You know how Baker Mayfield is and how dangerous he is on the field. He's an absolute monster, and he can take over games. He can end teams, especially teams like the Giants. But the Giants have a really good D-line. We'll see if they can turn around this week. They're going to be fighting for, I believe, Dayball's job this year, especially if they can't turn it around. We're going to be looking over now to the Packers versus the Niners. And I'm going to say the Packers are going to be winning this game because the Packers are just a lot better team, in my opinion. I think the Niners are starting to be on the downfall as well. I think them and the Chiefs last year was going to be the last time we're going to see them in the Super Bowl for about 2 to 3 years, maybe, especially the Chiefs. I don't think the Chiefs will be in the Super Bowl for another few years. I think the AFC is going to be wide open for a little bit because there's a lot of good teams there. But the Packers are going to win this game because they're at home. They're in Lambeau. This is pure weather for Lambeau time. This is football time. We're not going to get December snow craziness. We're going to get nice cold temperatures. We're going to get a nice hard-hitting game. These teams don't like each other. They're rivals. I want to see the Packers try to pull this one off. But the Moose Stat disagrees because the Niners are one of the best teams in the league, and the Moose Stat has a little rule with its home teams versus its away teams, and it gives the home team a little bit of an advantage with about 3 points of a difference. And with that home field advantage, The Packers were only 0.5 away from the Niners and being picked to win this week. So it's a really toss-em-up game. Do not be panicked if you put money on the Packers and the Niners win, or if you do vice versa, you put money on the Niners and you see the Packers win. Make sure you gamble responsibly. But I'm saying, though, don't be surprised. This is a toss-up game. I don't know what's going to happen here. Either team can win. George Kittle's back this week. We also have the Cardinals versus the Seahawks. They're going to be in Seattle, so we're going to see if the Cardinals can actually pull it off. I think they're the better team in the NFC West right now, and we might see the Cardinals actually make the playoffs and make a real deep push. Kyler Murray, I didn't really have that much faith in, but that team knows how to pull out wins, and they have a really good coach on their team, former Eagles defensive coordinator. But now we're going to have to get over to the Moose Trails pick, and that is the Seahawks. They normally pick the Cardinals, but with the home field advantage, the Seahawks are going to be getting the point win this week. And the Seahawks are a really good team. They just know how to stick around. They know how to keep teams competitive. They beat the Niners. They know how to make teams be humble. Kenneth Walker's a really good running back. DK Metcalf, when he's healthy, is a really good receiver. So is Jackson Smith and Jigba. So is Geno Smith, when he knows what he's doing and he's not overthinking things. Geno Smith's a really good quarterback too. This defense really well, really elite back end with the DBs. The Seahawks are a scary team, so I could see them also winning this game, especially in Seattle. But we're going to be going over to the most controversial pick of the weekend, and our last pick for this, and our little disagreement, it's going to be the Chargers winning against the Baltimore Ravens in Los Angeles. I think the Chargers are a lot better of a team, and with Jim Harbaugh and the way they play their offense and they play their defense, I think that's a complete mismatch against the Baltimore Ravens. A lot of people might disagree with me on this, but I really do believe in run-heavy teams are going to be dangerous against Baltimore. And with them finding their way around the pass game, how can you stop Justin Herbert on a play-action pass with Jim Harbaugh really starting to open up his offense? On top of them being a really good run defense and really being a top 10 run defense this year, the Baltimore Ravens are struggling on defense, and their offense just got proven that it can be stopped by a division rival with a similar type of play style to the Chargers. So I could see this team being a complete win by the Chargers on Monday Night Football, especially in LA. But Baltimore, of course, looks like a completely better team. They have a better stat situation. Derrick Henry's a better running back. Lamar Jackson's a better quarterback. The defense has an elite linebacker in there. They have good corners, good safeties. The Ravens are just a dangerous team. They went against the division rival. The Steelers are a legit team this year. They're going to be making a deep playoff push. So the Ravens could easily just stomp the Chargers, and it could be a complete revenge game for them. But that is going to be all for us today. I'm your host, Chris the Moose Johnson. Shout out to Will Lewin for a great episode today. Shout out to Kyle for another great episode. And shout out to Jake. Go get that money, man. And we'll see you guys next week.